The morning sun, usually a welcome golden embrace, felt like a spotlight exposing a fresh wound. Mark stood on his back porch, coffee long forgotten in his hand, staring at the raw, unforgivable truth of it. His fence, the sturdy, weathered cedar barrier that had marked the boundary of his property for 15 years, was gone. Not just damaged, not just leaning, but gone. In its place, a new, flimsy-looking chain-link monstrosity stood, clearly several feet into what was undeniably his land. A low growl rumbled in Mark's chest, a sound he hadn't made since his days on the high school football field. This wasn't just a minor encroachment. This was an audacious, in-your-face act of territorial conquest, and he knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the morning air precisely who was behind it. Karen. Karen, whose arrival in the house next door 2 years prior had been less a neighborly introduction and more a declaration of war. Their first interaction had involved her complaining about the unruly length of his grass despite it being perfectly manicured. Then came the accusations about his dog barking. The dog that was at the time asleep on the couch. The passive-aggressive notes left on his mailbox, the pointed glares over the hedge, the sudden interest in the precise placement of his garden gnome. Each incident a tiny, irritating pinprick in the fabric of his peaceful existence. But this was a full-blown assault. Mark walked slowly, deliberately towards the new fence. He ran a hand over the cold metal, feeling the cheapness of it, a stark contrast to the solid wood it had replaced. His old fence hadn't just been a boundary, it had been a testament to his father's craftsmanship, a weekend project they tackled together years ago, each post sunk with care, each plank nailed with purpose. It wasn't just property, it was memory, and Karen had ripped it out like a weed. He remembered the conversation, or rather the monologue from a few weeks ago. Karen had approached him, his saccharine smile plastered on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mark, darling," she chirped, "I've been looking at the property lines. I think your fence is actually a little off. It's encroaching on my side, you see. Just a tiny bit." Mark, ever the calm, rational one, had pulled out his survey documents. "Karen, I had a professional survey done when I bought the house. The fence is exactly where it should be. It's on my property line." Her smile had tightened. "Oh, well, these old surveys can be so inaccurate, can't they? I'm thinking of putting up a new one, just to be sure. I hate for there to be any misunderstandings." The emphasis on misunderstandings had been heavy, a veiled threat wrapped in false politeness. He dismissed it then, another typical Karenism. He'd assume she'd huff and puff and then drop it, as she usually did when confronted with facts. He underestimated her. He'd underestimated the sheer audacity of a woman who believed her desires superseded legal documents and common decency. Now, standing before the evidence of her hubris, Mark felt a dangerous heat rising within him. He wasn't a confrontational man by nature. He preferred quiet evenings working in his garden, the gentle rhythm of his life undisturbed. But Karen had crossed a line literally and figuratively. This wasn't just about a few feet of land. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the fundamental right to feel secure in one's own home. He pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he dialed his lawyer. This was going to be messy. He knew it. But as he looked from the new, ugly fence to the empty space where his father's craftsmanship once stood, a cold, hard resolve settled in his heart. Karen had started this, and Mark, for the first time, felt a primal urge to finish it. He just wasn't sure yet how far he was willing to reach. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a man whose voice was as dry as parchment, but whose advice was as solid as oak, had been clear. "Mark," he stated, his tone devoid of emotion, "you have a strong case. The survey documents are irrefutable. We'll send a cease and desist letter, demand the removal of the new fence and the restoration of your property. If she doesn't comply, we proceed with legal action." Mark had felt a flicker of hope. This was it. The civilized, legal way to handle a bully. He imagined Karen receiving the letter, her face paling, her saccharine smile finally cracking under the weight of officialdom. He'd envisioned her sheepishly hiring a crew to dismantle her flimsy fence, perhaps even offering a grudging apology. He was wrong. The letter was sent. Days turned into a week. Mark watched Karen's house like a hawk, half expecting to see activity, perhaps a U-Haul pulling up to cart away her hubris. Instead, nothing. The chain-link fence remained a constant, mocking reminder of her defiance. Then came Karen's response, delivered not by mail, but by a shrill, piercing voice across their shared lawn. Mark had been watering his prize-winning hydrangeas when she emerged from her back door, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Oh, Mark, darling," she trilled, her voice dripping with false concern. "Did you send me some sort of legal threat? How quaint." She held up the crumpled letter, shaking it dismissively. "Honestly, you're making such a fuss over nothing. I had my own survey done, a much more modern one. And it shows quite clearly that your old fence was in the wrong place. I'm simply correcting an oversight." Mark felt his jaw clench. "Karen, that's absurd. My survey is legally binding. You can't just move a property line." "Oh, but I can, darling, when the previous one was erroneous," she countered, her eyes gleaming with a self-satisfied malice. "My surveyor is much more thorough. He found all sorts of discrepancies, and frankly, I don't appreciate your aggressive tactics. I'm a very busy woman." She then launched into a tirade about her rights, her peace of mind, and the stress Mark was causing her. She spoke of her plans for the newly acquired strip of land, hinting at a new patio, perhaps a gazebo. All of it designed, Mark knew, to rub salt in the wound. He stood there, listening, a cold fury building inside him. The hope he felt after speaking with Mr. Henderson evaporated, replaced by a bitter realization. Karen wasn't going to be reasoned with. She wasn't going to back down. The legal route, while necessary, was clearly not going to be a quick or easy solution. She thrived on conflict, on pushing boundaries, on asserting her perceived dominance. As Karen finally retreated into her house, her laughter echoing mockingly in the quiet morning, Mark looked at the chain-link fence again. It wasn't just an ugly barrier. It was a symbol of her unyielding nature. He had played by the rules, and she had scoffed at them. He had sought justice through proper channels, and she had met him with contempt. A new thought, dark and exhilarating, began to form in his mind. If the law couldn't make her see reason, perhaps a different kind of persuasion was needed. A persuasion that spoke her own language. Direct, undeniable, and utterly disruptive. He walked past the new fence, his gaze drifting towards the back of Karen's property, where a small, brightly painted shed sat precariously close to the gentle slope that led down to the creek. A creek that, after a recent heavy rain, was running higher and faster than usual. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Mark's face. He wasn't sure yet what he would do, but the primal urge to finish this, to truly finish it, was now a roaring fire. Karen had moved his fence. Now he would move something of hers. Mark spent the next few days in a state of simmering contemplation. The legal battle would drag on, he knew, and while he was confident in his position, the thought of endless court dates and escalating legal fees filled him with dread. No, Karen needed a different kind of lesson, a more personal one. His gaze kept returning to the brightly painted shed. It was a garish shade of turquoise, a testament to Karen's questionable taste, and it sat on a slightly elevated wooden platform, seemingly just placed there without any real foundation. It was filled, he knew from casual observation, with her gardening tools, her collection of ceramic gnomes, even more unsettling than his own single dignified one, and what looked like an assortment of decorative birdhouses. It was her sanctuary, her little slice of outdoor kitsch. And it was, he noted with a growing sense of mischievous satisfaction, remarkably close to the creek. The creek itself was a minor tributary, usually a gentle trickle, but the recent torrential rains had swollen it into a respectable, fast-flowing stream. The banks were muddy and slick, and the current, while not a raging torrent, was certainly strong enough to carry anything lighter than a small car. The shed, he estimated, was probably around 8x10 feet, made of thin plywood and likely not very heavy. The idea, once a fleeting dark whisper, began to solidify into a concrete plan. It was audacious. It was probably ill-advised. It was, without a doubt, exactly the kind of thing Karen would never expect. And that, Mark realized, was its greatest appeal. He began his preparations with a quiet intensity. He acquired a heavy-duty hand truck from his garage, the kind used for moving refrigerators. He found a coil of thick, durable rope. He even dug out an old pair of waders, remnants from a forgotten fishing trip, just in case. He studied the terrain, the angle of the slope, the path the shed would take. He waited for the perfect conditions. A night when Karen was out and when the creek was still running high. The opportunity presented itself on a Tuesday evening. He saw Karen's car pull out of her driveway, her usual evening bridge game, he presumed. The sky was overcast, promising more rain, but for now, it was just a cool, damp stillness. The air hummed with a quiet anticipation. Mark waited until darkness had fully descended, the kind of inky blackness that swallows all sound. He dressed in dark clothing, pulled on his waders, and grabbed his tools. His heart hammered in his chest, a mix of apprehension and exhilarating defiance. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about a perverse sense of justice. It was about showing Karen that actions had consequences, even if those consequences came in the form of a rogue shed. He crept silently across his lawn, past the offending chain-link fence, and onto Karen's property. The shed loomed in the dim light, a silent, unsuspecting victim. He circled it, assessing its weak points, the way it sat on its flimsy platform. He could feel the slight give in the ground beneath it, softened by the rain. He positioned the hand truck, carefully sliding its base beneath one side of the shed. He tied the rope securely around the shed's frame, then around the hand truck, creating a makeshift lever. He took a deep breath, the damp earth smell filling his lungs. This was it, the moment of truth. With a grunt, he leaned into the hand truck, pushing down, leveraging his weight. The shed groaned, a low, protesting creak. He pushed harder, feeling the resistance, then a sudden, satisfying lurch. The shed tilted, its front edge lifting slightly off the ground. He adjusted his grip, his muscles straining, and pushed again. Slowly, agonizingly, the shed began to slide. It wasn't rolling yet, but it was moving inch by agonizing inch towards the muddy slope and the waiting creek. The game was officially on. The initial lurch was the hardest part. The shed, despite its flimsy appearance, was heavier than Mark anticipated, its contents adding a surprising inertia. But once it began to move, a strange momentum took over. The hand truck, acting as a fulcrum, allowed him to shift the weight, and the muddy ground, softened by the recent rains, offered less resistance than solid earth. He worked in a focused silence, the only sounds the creak of the shed, the soft squelch of his wetters in the mud, and the distant, rhythmic gurgle of the swollen creek. He pushed, pulled, adjusted, and repeated the process. Each inch gain was a small victory, a silent defiance against Karen's brazen act. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air, and his muscles burned with the exertion, but a grim satisfaction fueled him. The shed, now free of its shallow foundation, began to pick up speed as it neared the steepest part of the slope. There was a slow, deliberate descent at first, then a more confident glide. Mark guided it, using the rope to steer, ensuring it stayed on course. He imagined Karen's face when she returned, the dawning horror as she discovered her beloved turquoise sanctuary had vanished. The thought spurred him on. He reached the very edge of the bank, the ground becoming slicker, the mud deeper. The creek, not just feet away, looked dark and foreboding, its current a swirling, powerful force. He could feel the vibrations of the water through the earth. This was the point of no return. With one final mighty shove, Mark pushed the hand truck clear. The shed teetered on the brink, a precarious silhouette against the faint glow of the distant town lights. For a moment, it seemed to hang suspended, defying gravity, a turquoise box caught between land and water. Then, with a soft, almost polite plop, it slid off the bank. It hit the water with a surprisingly gentle splash considering its size. The current immediately seized it, pulling it away from the bank. Mark watched, mesmerized, as Karen's shed, complete with its ceramic gnomes and decorative birdhouses, began its slow, inevitable journey downstream. It bobbed and spun, a ridiculous, brightly colored raft on the dark water, shrinking rapidly as the current carried it around the bend and out of sight. A wave of exhaustion washed over Mark, followed by an immense, almost giddy sense of relief. He stood there, breathing heavily, watching the empty space where the shed had been. The night was still, the only sound the rushing water. He hadn't heard a single dog bark. Not a single light had come on in Karen's house. The operation had been a complete success. He carefully made his way back across the muddy bank, his waders heavy with water. He retrieved the hand truck, wiping it clean, and coiled the rope. He felt a strange mix of triumph and a slight lingering disbelief at what he had just done. It was petty, perhaps. It was certainly unconventional, but it felt, in a deeply satisfying way, like justice. As he slipped back into his own yard, past the offending chain-link fence, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. The fence was still there, a monument to Karen's audacity. But now, so was the memory of a turquoise shed floating serenely down the creek. The score, he mused, was finally evening out. He wondered how long it would take Karen to notice, and what precisely her reaction would be. He had a feeling that wouldn't be quiet. The next morning, Mark woke with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in years. He brewed his coffee, savoring the aroma, and then, with a casualness he didn't quite feel, stepped onto his back porch. The chain-link fence was still there, an ugly scar on the landscape, but beyond it, where the turquoise shed had once stood, was nothing but an empty, muddy patch of ground. He didn't have to wait long for Karen's reaction. A piercing shriek, sharp enough to curdle milk, tore through the morning air. It was followed by a string of incoherent shouts, a frantic scrambling, and then a truly magnificent wail of pure, unadulterated outrage. Mark leaned against the porch railing, taking a slow sip of his coffee. He imagined her standing there, hands on her hips, her face a mask of disbelief and fury as she stared at the vacant spot. He pictured her frantic search, her eyes scanning the creek, perhaps even a desperate dash downstream. Finally, she appeared at the new fence, her face blotchy and contorted, her hair a wild mess. "Mark. Mark, you monster. What have you done, any?" she screamed, her voice hoarse with indignation. Mark met her gaze, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning, Karen. Is something the matter?" he asked, his voice calm, almost serenely polite. "My shed. It's going. You did this. I know you did," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the empty space. "Your shed?" Mark feigned surprise. "Oh dear, are you sure? Perhaps it just rolled away. The ground has been quite soft with all the rain, hasn't it? And that creek can be rather strong." He paused, then added with a touch of faint concern, "I do hope your gnomes are all right." Karen sputtered, speechless for a moment, her face turning a shade of puce that perfectly matched her fury. You, you. She seemed to be searching for a word heinous enough to describe him, but none seemed to suffice. I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyer. You'll pay for this, Mark. You'll pay dearly. Mark simply nodded, taking another sip of coffee. As you wish, Karen. I've already spoken with my lawyer regarding the illegal placement of your fence on my property. I'm sure they'll be very interested in this new development. The mention of his lawyer seemed to deflate some of her immediate rage, replacing it with a flicker of something akin to fear. She knew he had legal grounds regarding the fence. The shed, while the shocking act was a different matter, one that might be harder to prove. The police did come, of course. Mark explained the situation calmly, showing them his survey detailing Karen's refusal to move the fence. He expressed his concern for her missing shed, suggesting it was an unfortunate accident due to the soft ground and swollen creek. Without any direct evidence and with the ongoing property dispute, the police could do little more than take a report and advise them both to resolve their differences civilly. Karen's lawyer sent another sharply worded letter, threatening legal action for property damage. Mark's lawyer responded with an equally firm letter, reiterating the fence encroachment and hinting at a counterclaim for trespass and damages. The legal back and forth continued for a few more weeks, a flurry of official-sounding paper. But something had shifted. The shrill cries from Karen's yard became less frequent. The pointed glares over the hedge softened, replaced by a wary avoidance. The chain-link fence remained, but Mark noticed that Karen no longer spent time near it, no longer made plans for her new patio. One afternoon, Mark saw a crew arrive at Karen's house. They were not building a gazebo. They were slowly and methodically dismantling the chain-link fence. Days later, a new, much smaller, and clearly temporary wooden fence appeared, placed precisely on the original surveyed property line. Mark never saw his old cedar fence again, nor Karen's turquoise shed. But the silence that settled between their properties was a different kind of peace. It wasn't a friendly peace, not a neighborly one. It was an uneasy truce, born of mutual understanding. Karen had learned that Mark, the quiet man who loved his garden, had a line, and if you crossed it, he might just roll your shed into the creek. And sometimes that was all the justice one needed.